Ciao. So, we are living a very special moment because a few months ago you launched How We Will Live Together, and then nobody has the possibility to live together since we have been locked down for 6 months, which is a completely exceptional situation, the first time in the history of Biennale, the first time for everybody, but the title is perfectly fitting with the situation. So how can you link, let's say, the idea of the exhibition with what we live now and the fact that we are scared of living together?
Maybe it helps us that it's an open question rather than a proposition. Sure. It keeps it open. And indeed, the title could be seen as a coincidence, as an irony, I'm not sure. And at the same time, when we started thinking about whether we have to adjust the exhibition to the present circumstance, we looked at the reasons we came up with the theme. And I thought that the reasons I asked this question is because we are facing climate change, which would require us that we think completely how we live together, if we were to live at all. It requires that we rethink our relationships across borders, the refugee questions, political versus geographic relationships, to deal also with ecological issues. It requires us to rethink our political polarization that is increasing, dividing us more and more. And it requires us to rethink our relationship with ourselves, but also with other beings. In many ways, if you think about these different dimensions of the reason we asked the question, why or how will we live together, these are the very underlying reasons that led us to the pandemic. And so it makes the question maybe very direct, but at a deeper level, still very relevant. And it's for that that we believe strongly that the title and the reasons behind the title maintain their validity despite the pandemic, and maybe acquire a different meaning because of the pandemic. People will experience the projects differently. And as a result of that, I think some of the participants are adjusting, some are maintaining the course. But I would say in general, people still feel the relevance of their projects and an increasing relevance, and are at some point welcoming of the conditions we're living in because it gives their projects more value. But in some cases, they are worried that it would give it too much of a narrow dimension, that they want to make sure that it is accommodated but not consumed by the present condition.
Well, I think the title is so powerful in this moment because I remember when you launched it, it was a kind of how to bring architecture into in a larger political agenda in relation to the fact that architecture is not separated by the world, but it's inside the world, and is also dealing with the idea of a kind of let's say, social agreement, what Rousseau was the contrat social, which is very important, which brings this contract not only in the society, but with all the living beings, with the environment we are living. So a kind of a responsibility which is given
to architecture and to space. And I mean, this is right on in relationship to the present condition, because what I was proposing through the title and the theme is a new spatial contract, because I feel like we are unable to come up with a new social contract with all of those problems that we're facing. We're still unable to bring society together. So why not rely on architecture and its ways of defining space, spatial possibilities of interaction, to rehearse the social contract at different scales. And so when the pandemic happened, we resorted to the spatial contracts first, to measure distances, to think about degrees of isolation, degrees of contact. And these right now are the ones that are defining our social engagement. So in a way, there's another dimension of the pandemic that is related to the exhibition, that the spatial is informing the social.
Yeah, well, and this is even more crucial because what we are living today is that the pandemic increased the social differences. No? So this idea of the distance is not only physical, but is mainly social and economical. So the idea of a spatial contract is even more relevant and urgent in this moment. No?
And you hear people talking about physical distancing, but social connectedness through other means than the physical.
Yeah.
And I think the possibilities that we have rehearsed during the pandemic and continue to lay out, like when we measured the chairs apart here and how we can sit so that we can have a conversation while still maintaining that, are all ways in which architecture helps us define our interactions socially and takes on, I'm not going to say the lead, but at least a prominence and an imaginary inspiration for society in terms of thinking of possibilities of interaction.
Do you think it is one of the possible ways to bring back architecture to the real life, to society? Because in the last decades we are living a kind of distances between, say, the high architecture and the everyday living. No? So this could be a way to bring architecture to a kind of a direct responsibility within a social realm, which is asking for vision, which is asking for different solutions.
Yes, and I also want to add that as a result of us trying to figure out how we're going to rearrange space in order to live together safely, there's always been an architect at the table.
Absolutely.
And that's very important, that's very refreshing. Because it's not that the social agenda is worked out and then the architect comes in to express it. The architect is now part of the shaping of the social space.
Also considering the fact that during the last century we have been consuming so much space and sources that today the social contract is meaning transforming without consuming. So it's a kind of totally different agenda in relation to the modernist vision, you know, of the idea of building a new world.
There's a lot in this Biennale that is about reconceiving the resources we have. And the big section in the Giardini is dedicated to the global commons, how to preserve them, protect them, and enhance them. But many of the projects are about densification, meaning compacting and trying to make more use out of space, adaptive reuse, new resources and materials that can be more accommodating of the limited of our conditions and limited resources. The environmental agenda pervades the whole exhibition.
So can we say that the word hope is one of the key words in this agenda?
I think so. If you look at the exhibition that is up right now in the archives exhibition, you see architecture having a very different tone in terms of how it presents its project to the world compared to the other arts. The other arts can be critical, can be dystopic, can be agonistic. Architecture in general has been optimistic, proposing opportunities, visions, new worlds, sometimes critical, but it doesn't go that extreme. I believe that we can go farther in our critical, making us aware of what's going wrong in the world, but we cannot do that without abandoning presenting alternatives. That's in a way our vocation, that's our disposition as architects. In a way we are condemned to optimism.
Yeah.
And that's the exhibition, hopefully.